Hey guys, how are you all beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine. And yes, this is next part of Godlike Hokage in Naruto. The Gura Gura no Mi is known as the strongest fruit in the world of One Piece. In Naruto world, the blood limit would grant the strongest power for those ninjas. But what if the Gura Gura no Mi is found in the world of Naruto and after it is eaten it will be like a blood limit power? Well, the MC just took that fruit. This story begins before the Second Ninja War by 2 years. So let's start without any delay. When he saw that person's face, his expression changed from surprise to respect. Naito Dono. Today's Kakashi is extremely respectful of Naito, not only because he has seen Naito's shocking power, but also because Naito is now recognized by the ninja world as the god of Shinobis. Naito looked at Kakashi, nodded slightly, and walked toward him. A long time ago, when Kakashi was born, Sakumo asked Naito that if something happened to Kakashi, he would look after him. But after that, things happened, and Naito left Konoha. When he came to Kakashi, Naito looked at him and asked, "I've heard that you've developed an A-class lightning release ninjutsu." Kakashi looked a little surprised that Naito knew about his new ninjutsu, but he didn't look proud about it. He even said with some shame, "Yes, but that technique has certain dangers. Minato-sensei told me not to use it." No doubt, this A-class ninjutsu was Chidori. Chidori is an A-class ninjutsu, and its upgraded is Reikiri, which is an S-class ninjutsu. Unlike the original, Kakashi didn't get Obito's Sharingan, so he was still having some problems with the Chidori. Because Chidori is a close-distant attack, and because he moves very quickly, it brings danger to the user because he can't see the enemy's counter-attack. It needs good observation to be used perfectly. Thinking of this, Naito's eyes suddenly flashed. "Is it dangerous? Show it to me." After hearing this sentence, Kakashi froze for a moment, but it was evident that Naito wanted to give him some advice. Thinking about this, Kakashi felt a little delighted, although he was a jonin, and even Minato didn't have anything to teach him anymore, but to be pointed by the god of Shinobi is such a great honor. A man who has been recognized by the entire world as a god that no one could match. It will be a great honor to get Naito's guidance. Chidori. In an instant, he made some hand seal, then he lowered his right hand, and the chakra immediately changed its nature and burst out into a white thunderbolt gathering in his hand. Zizi. Immediately afterward, a sharp sound, like the sound of 1,000 birds roared in the field. Naito watched Kakashi's process of releasing the Chidori. He used his Ultra Perceive to sense every detail in Kakashi's, even more precisely than the Sharingan and the Bakugan. Seeing how Naito was focused on him, Kakashi bowed his head slightly, then rushed toward a wooden stake on the training ground, and instantly his hand got wrapped in thunder and pierced through that wooden stake directly. Whoosh! After casting the Chidori once, Kakashi's forehead sweated slightly, because he was just practicing, and the Chidori is advanced ninjutsu, which consumes a lot of chakra. Turning around, Kakashi looked at Naito, hoping that Naito could point some missing things, but Kakashi was left slightly disappointed when he saw how Naito didn't say anything with his head down. Well, this ninjutsu already has a change in the nature chakra. It's an advanced technique that even Minato couldn't improve. I'm afraid that even Naito Dono can't do anything about it. Kakashi has already accepted that fate, so he wasn't too disappointed. Even if he couldn't help him with the Chidori, Naito was the god of Shinobi, of course, he can guide him to another road. After walking to Naito, Kakashi still stood there with a respectful expression, waiting for Naito's response quietly. After a while, Naito raised his head, then looked at Kakashi and said, "This technique is indeed dangerous, but the actual reason is that because you don't have enough control over the thunder nature." Ah! Kakashi looked shocked, but this technique was developed by him. He wouldn't even dream of creating such an advanced technique if he didn't have great control of the thunder nature. There was a look of disbelief on Kakashi's face. Looking at him, Naito smiled a little, not too surprised. For Kakashi, his control over the thunder chakra is already perfect, and not many people can exceed him in the world. But it's still not enough. At the next moment, Naito directly stretched out his hand, and all of a sudden, the chakra burst out, then instantly changed its nature, turning into chakra with lightning nature. ZZ. Suddenly, the electric light flickered, emitting the sound of thousands of birds. Is this my Chidori? Looking at this scene, Kakashi's eyes showed a touch of shock. Naito was able to directly inject chakra in his palm and change its nature instantly without even doing any hand signs. This is what chakra control means. No wonder, Naito said his control wasn't good, because compared to his, there's indeed a big gap. This Chidori of yours is created from a great number of condensed chakra, very strong ninjutsu, with a breakneck speed it can penetrate anything. However, it's really difficult to avoid enemies' counterattack when you're using a high speed like this and moving in a straight line. Naito looked at Kakashi and said these few words, pointing out the advantages and disadvantages of this technique, while Kakashi was nodding his head. So, Naito looked at his palm. Suddenly the lightning started gathering in the center. Crackling. In an instant, the thunder and lightning exploded madly, then condensed together, emitting a bright white light at the center, with electric rays flickering around it. However, under Naito's control, those rays got forced into the thunder ball in the middle. Suddenly, it became dazzling to the extreme. Kakashi looked stunned. He even took a few steps back subconsciously. He thought that the thunder is gonna explode due to the high pressure, but it didn't happen. After he added the lightning nature, Naito rotated the chakra on his palm, creating a thunderbolt ball similar to the Rasengan, and it looked stable. Looking at this scene, Kakashi couldn't help but feel shocked. His chakra's control over the lightning nature release is simply amazing. If you can do this step, the previous disadvantages will no longer exist. Naito looked faintly at his palm while the thunderbolt ball was rotating there like a Rasengan. Suddenly, he squeezed his palm slightly. Whoosh! The thunder ball didn't explode, but a white ray of thunder extended instantly, and penetrated a distant wooden stake. This is somewhat similar to Sasuke's Chidori sharp spear in the original, but because his control was better, it was more powerful. Kakashi swallowed. At this moment, he felt that the gap between the two of them was almost immeasurable. His control compared to Naito is not even worth comparing. Of course, you can adjust the form as much as you want, you can use it as a long-ranged attack, or just penetrate enemies from a short-range distance. And if you want to go further, then... The moment he said that sentence, Naito's expression became sober for the first time. What he demonstrated was just a simple and essential thing. The next one is the real thing. The chakra in Naito's body suddenly surged and injected more chakra into his palm, making the thunder ball get bigger until it became half the size of his head. Kakashi looked a little scared. He feared that Naito will overdo it and that thing explodes. It will be life-threatening. However, in the next moment, Kakashi's expression stagnated. He already looked shocked, but the next scene made him terrified. The half-head-sized thunder ball suddenly got condensed and compressed again instantly. At this time, something weird happened. After it got squeezed to the extreme, shockingly, it turned into a water ball. The reason why he said it was a water ball, and looked shocked, because after it got squeezed, suddenly it melts, and turned into the shape of liquid, flowing around the finger of Naito, then even changed to a bright white ribbon, flowing from side to side. Is this lightning chakra natura? Kakashi seemed in disbelief. He even wondered if Naito has replaced the lightning with water nature at that moment. Looking at Kakashi's expression, Naito smiled a little, then moved the lightning liquid toward Kakashi. Looking at that liquid lightning form up close, made Kakashi finally realize that I was still lightning, not water. Watching this liquid form, Kakashi couldn't help but reach it out with his finger. Even if he was gonna get injured, he wanted to feel what kind of power it contained. What surprised him even more, is when he tried to touch it, it felt really like water, flowing gently around his finger. However, it didn't feel cool, but hot. At the same time, Kakashi could feel that familiar scary classicity of the lightning. Once it gets out of control, it will no longer feel that gentle. This is the extreme change of nature, and also the biggest change of form. This technique can be used for offensive and defensive situations, and it almost has no weaknesses. With a flick of Naito's finger, the liquid lightning condensed then flew back. With a thought from Naito, it instantly turned into several sharp spears that penetrated through all of the wooden stakes in the distance. This scene made Kakashi feel horrified. These are the 3 levels, Kakashi. The Chidori you've mastered belongs to the first level. It's an A-class ninjutsu, then one I showed you before. If you could mastered, then your Chidori will upgrade to an S-class ninjutsu. As for this, it is. Naito gently flicked his finger, and the fist-sized thunder ball flew out directly to the sky and caused a thunderstorm on such a sunny day in Konoha. At that moment, all the people in Konoha looked at the sky, exposing shocking colors. SSS class. Ignoring the thunderstorm in the sky that he has just caused, Naito looked at Kakashi calmly and said, I will stay in Konoha for a month. Within this period, you can come and ask for help at any time. Roar. Looking at the thunderstorm spreading in the sky, Kakashi couldn't calm down for a long time. When it finally gradually started to fade away, he finally woke up but found out that Naito had already left. There was a scroll on the ground in front of him. HolyOniiSama, he's almost a godlike existence. Can a human really train to that extreme? Picking up the scroll, Kakashi couldn't suppress those feelings in his heart and ended up talking to himself. Naito stayed for a short time in Konoha. During this month, Kakashi's control over the lightning chakra nature made fast progress. After all, he had already an excellent talent for lightning release and mastered the 2nd level. However, the difficulty of the 3rd level was too much for him. After all, there's a big difference between an S-class and an SSS class ninjutsu. Even the amount of his chakra is not enough to practice the 3rd level. This is no longer about effort, it also requires talent and physical fitness. At a tea house in Konoha, Naito sat quietly in a corner, but despite this, people were looking at him with respect and admiration from time to time. It's almost time to leave. After drinking his tea, Naito stood up. During this month, in addition to training Kakashi, Naito has also kept an eye on the soul enhancement in his spiritual space. At the same time, Naito got another piece of information about the spiritual space from Orochimaru. However, it wasn't much different from what Naito himself has created. It seems he took the right direction. Naito prepared to return back to the Rain Village and work on increasing the speed of his soul fusion. Naito's spiritual space has become more stable, and the strength of his soul has improved a lot. It's time for him to try to increase the rate of blending again. However, just when he was about to walk out of the tea house and leave Konoha, something unexpected happened to Naito. Several masked shinobis suddenly appeared in front of Naito, and with no emotion, one of them said, "Naito Dono, Master Danza has called for you." These shinobis are undoubtedly from the roots. Of course, this wasn't important. What's essential is that Danza finally dared to show himself. Naito was surprised, but he couldn't help but smirk. Danza has always avoided conflicts by hiding in the dark, now he dares to show himself. It's as if he's asking for his death. Now that Danza is seeking his death, Naito is ready to put him on the road. Even the Kusanagi sword trembled upon hearing the name Danza. In Naito's point of view, Danza is not an enemy at all, but an ant that needs to be crushed. Although he has mastered many forbidden techniques, those things aren't enough to stop Naito now. Naito has become very powerful, his physical strength is almost perfect, his chakra has even surpassed some Baijua, his soul has strengthened a lot. He's immune to all kind of genjutsu, even Sasuke's genjutsu level won't affect him. Below the sixth path, all are just mere ants. Although Naito hasn't reached the sixth path level, he's currently above the Super Kage level. Once he reaches that level, he will unlock new words such as immortality, space ninjutsu, and other things. At that point, he's not afraid to say that he can even conquer Hagoromo. Konoha's underground, the Roots organization base. It was the first time for Naito to come to this place. Naito didn't perceive it before because he wasn't interested in what Danza was hiding. Compared with the Anbu, the root is hidden deeper. Walking in the Root's base, Naito could see the thick pillars that were supporting the village above. "Where are you hiding then?" Naito used his Ultra Perceive to check the entire base and found Danza, who looked somehow strange. Naito roughly guessed the game that Danza was trying to pull, but he didn't have any fear. Danza is not enough to make Naito feel afraid. If he still fears the likes of Danza, then what was the purpose of the path he took in these previous years then? Without any hesitation or second guessing, Naito directly stepped into the lobby of the Roots base. Danza was standing there quietly with a can in his hand, and with his right arm wrapped by a bandage, and hanging from his chest. When he saw Naito coming in, Danza's eyes opened wide, showing a strange light. "Here he is," in the blink of an eye, the little demon entered. His sentence came to an abrupt end. Because before he could even finish his sentence, he got suddenly overwhelmed by a strange force. Boom! In an instant, Danza's body got bombarded to the air, with countless cracks on the space spreading around him. Finally, it burst out with enormous power that shattered him into pieces. "Who gave you permission to talk to me this way?" Naito looked at what left from Danza's body, then gently retracted his fingers. "Danza-sama." Seeing this scene made the Root Shinobis feel terrified. They didn't expect that Naito, who just arrived to kill Danza directly with one move before the former could even finish his sentence. However, they seemed to be restricted by orders of not interfering no matter what happens, so no one has moved an inch. Suddenly, the shuttered crumbs disappeared. "Sure enough, you didn't give this old man a chance to speak. With this kind of power, you've grown more arrogant." Danza appeared again in the same previous position, then took off the bandage off his arm, exposing the disgusting 8 Sharingan eyes planted on his arm, with one of them slowly getting closed. "Izonagi." Looking at this scene, Naito didn't seem surprised, he already foreguessed this outcome. It's estimated that the last time he attacked the Uchiha, Danza secretly exchanged with the Uchiha clan information or money with some of these eyes. It's not that I didn't give you a chance to talk, but I didn't really wanna hear your nonsense. Naito looked at Danza faintly, stretched out his hand again, and flickered his fingers. So again, just shut up. Boom. Danza turned into shattered crumbs again. He didn't even have the time to react, let alone dodge Naito's attack. It's as if he was inside Naito's grasp, there was nowhere to run or hide. You don't want to know, why did this old man call you? Boom. Danza got crushed again. I don't. Naito looked at Danza calmly, although he was looking straight ahead at him, it seemed as if he was overlooking on him from above. Although they were trained not to feel anything, all the root shinobis around were shocked by this display of power, with their hearts were shaking from fear. Damn this! Danza, who was resurrected again, was a little annoyed. He was a high-ranked ninja in Konoha, and still, he was getting beaten by this kid again and again. If he didn't have the Izanagi, he would have died a long time ago. Moreover, Naito killed him without even taking out his weapon, he was just flickering his fingers. He wasn't taking him seriously. Boom. Before he could say anything this time, Danza was killed again. Don't even think about opening your mouth, I don't want to hear your voice. From the beginning to the end, Naito stood still and didn't move, he was just moving his finger, killing Danza time after time. Silence. Danza came back again, but he didn't have any anger or killing intent, he actually looked strangely excited, as if he was looking at a rare treasure. This power has come from heaven, it's the power of gods. With this power, unifying the shinobi world and making Konoha on the top will no longer be just a dream. The greed and madness that was coming from him were unbelievable, but this time when he resurrected, his eyes were closed the whole time. Suddenly he opened them. He had Sharingan in his eyes, but not any ordinary Sharingan, this is a Mangekyou Sharingan. Naito didn't look surprised when he saw these eyes, no wonder Danza dared to call him. Did he get Uchiha Shisui's Mangekyou Sharingan, like in the original? It's several years earlier before the event of the Uchiha's extermination. But it seems that Shisui has managed to awaken his Mangekyou Sharingan a few years earlier. After discovering the ability of Shisui's eyes, he killed him and took his Mangekyou Sharingan. Suddenly, Danza's chakra surged wildly. If it were Shisui, he would have used these eyes to make you protect Konoha. But such a power should be used to unify the shinobi world. At this moment, let out all of his hatred and evil aura, then smirked as a strong spiritual force hit Naito's body. Become my Took, you Naito. With a touch of unstoppable excitement, scenes started flashing in Danza's mind. He saw himself as the fourth Hokage standing on the peak of the world. The Kotomatsu Kami is a genjutsu technique specifically for Shisui's Mangekyou Sharingan. It's a powerful and subtle genjutsu that controls others' minds. It affects the will of the soul directly. Danza's soul felt extremely powerful the moment he used the Mangekyou Sharingan, trying to directly control Naito's soul, and forcibly modify his will. For a moment, the world in front of Danza became a pure red space, with only Naito and Danza standing in it. This is a spiritual space. Behind Danza, there were two huge Mangekyou eyes with the same shape as Shisui's. Along with it, a strange force burst out from Danza's body and hit Naito. I just need to defeat Naito's will, and then forcefully modify his thoughts. then he will become a perfect tool in my hand. Boom! Suddenly, that beautiful fantasy world that Danza has created got crushed before his eyes. Looking at the scene in front of him, his pupils shrunk suddenly, revealing a hint of shock, and kept looking at Naito in front of him in disbelief. What? What is this? This is impossible. Naito was standing in the distance, watching him calmly, with a huge white bubble behind him. This bubble was even more significant than the pair of the Mangekyou Sharingan behind Danza. At the same time, a golden light suddenly emerged from the bubble and clashed with Danza's spiritual power fiercely, tearing this blood world from the middle. Is this the Kotomatsu Kami? With this genjutsu, spiritual power can indeed become very strong. It can forcibly affect the will of ordinary ninjas, and modify their thoughts. Looking at the huge Mangekyou Sharingan behind Danza, Naito whispered to himself. Even if it's a godlike level technique, and it can create a spiritual space and suppress others' souls, but Naito's spiritual space is far beyond its level. Uchiha Itachi in the original once said that no technique is perfect, including the Kotomatsu Kami, all have weaknesses. Danza is just a Kage level. Even with the enhancing of the Kotomatsu Kami, his spiritual power can reach the Super Kage level at most. It's such a pathetic thing that he wants to defeat Naito's spiritual energy that is almost at the God level with this kind of strength. If the Kotomatsu Kami were that strong, the sixth path would have used it to change Kaguya's will, and the later war wouldn't have even happened. Raw. The golden light spirit collided with Danza's spiritual space, dividing this world into half gold and half blood. Moreover, the golden side had the upper hand, and it even looked like it's slowly swallowing the bloody side. No, this is impossible, Kotomatsu Kami can't defeat him, this guy. Danza looked at this scene while gritting his teeth, the horror and shock were evident in his eyelids. He couldn't back down now, Danza had no choice but to fight for his life. Oh yeah! With a wild roar, Danza's body and the pair of the Mangekyou Sharingan behind him suddenly ignited scarlet flames. After the igniting of these flames, it fiercely prevented the spreading of the golden spiritual force and barely managed to stabilize the two words again. However, this technique was burning his soul force. Danza felt like if his soul was sinking into the darkness. The pain of the soul is naturally much stronger than the body, and Danza was barely tolerating it with a distorted expression on his face. The flames ignited madly, blocking Naito's golden spirit force and gradually swallowing Naito's side. Of course, the rate of this process was slow. Even if Danza has dried his whole force to death, he won't be able to defeat Naito's spiritual force. Naito stood on the other side, looking at Danza gritting his teeth, then shook his head slowly. You seem like you still don't understand the big is the gap between us. Suddenly, Naito slowly raised his hand, then gently squeezed it. Crack! With that simple move, suddenly, some fragmentation appeared in the middle between the two worlds. Those cracks spread in an instant, preventing Danza's scarlet flames from moving, then they spread toward Danza's red world. At the next moment, the two huge Mangekyou Sharingan behind Danza showed signs of fragmentation like a broken mirror. The crack began to look more evident, and finally, it shrouded his entire side, and under Danza's incredible gazes, everything crushed. In the outside world, Danza's spiritual world got shattered, and Naito's power seemed like it has even affected Danza's soul along. Naito watched Danza's red world completely collapsing in front of him, then he slowly retracted his hand, and his consciousness instantly returned to his body. This confrontation of the spiritual force may seem long, but it only took a moment in the outside world. What the Roots Shine Abyss only saw is Danza's opening his eyes and suddenly exposing the Mangekyo Sharingan, then two's movements have stagnated from a moment. Immediately after that, Danza spit out blood out of his mouth, with his eyes spilling blood too. Then his whole body knelt directly on the ground in front. Danza's Mangekyo Sharingan seemed to have broken marks, which made everyone terrified just by looking to his eyes, while Danza unbelievably looked at Naito. It appears that his spiritual force didn't destroy them. Thus, Naito retracted his hand and gently squeezed it. Suddenly the Mangekyo Sharingan got destroyed. Pua. Danza seemed like he was gonna say something but suddenly spit out blood. Danza felt extreme pain. He could get rid of the Sharingan side effects after he transplanted Hashirama's cells. This is the price he had to pay for failing. This is because he got defeated in the spiritual space. It seems that getting defeated doesn't mean only failing to control the other's will, but it also affects the user's soul. Looking at Danza kneeling before him, with blood coming out of his eyes and mouth, Naito crushed him again with his shock force. Crack! Suddenly the world showed trace fragmentations, and under the power of the shock force, his body got smashed again instantly. Moreover, what shocked the Roots Shine Abyss wasn't Naito killing Danza again, but how he controlled those forces to only cause damage to the former but none to the surrounding place. His control is simply amazing. Damn this! Danza, who got resurrected again, looked at Naito with his ordinary eyes while gritting his teeth. Since Naito couldn't be controlled, he had no choice but to kill him. Although it was a pity, it was still better than watching Naito leading the world into chaos. Under Danza's order, the Roots Shine Abyss, who were lining up all around, started doing hand signs simultaneously. Buzz. Suddenly, a purple light wall appeared in the field, then instantly trapped Naito inside it. This was the Violet Flames formation, but it was a higher form than the 6 Violet Flames formation that Konoha's Shinobi used suppressed the Ichibi on the battlefield. This was the 8 Violet Flames formation. However, Naito couldn't help but laugh watching these purple light walls around him. If it was the 4 Red Yang formation, it might have successfully trapped him inside, making him unable to break free, but this kind of ninjutsu won't stop Naito. One punch is more than enough to break it. Of course, Danza knew that, so he never relied on it to stop Naito. All he wanted to is stagnate Naito's movements for a moment. If only needs a moment to cast that technique. Suddenly, 8 additional Shine Abyss appeared next to the 8 who were casting the 8 Violet Flames formation, then ripped their clothes off and shouted, "Reverse 4 symbol sealing." In the original, Danza used this technique before his death to share the same fate as Sasuke. This was Danza's plan. He trapped him using the 8 Violet Flames formation, then used 8 of his Roots Shine Abyss to perform the reverse 4 symbol sealing without giving Naito any chance to escape. Even the 8 Shine Abyss who were casting the 8 Violet Flames formation won't escape the scope of this attack. In other words, 16 people were willing to give their lives to kill Naito. It seems that the years of Danza's brainwashing and training them has come in handy in this situation. The look in their eyes behind the mask seemed extremely indifferent, emotionless. They simply didn't have the slightest hesitation. Whiz. Danza left the hall directly, then turned and stared at Naito. Dying from the sacrifice of 16 elite ninjas is worthy of your title, God of Shinobi. Whoosh. After they ripped their clothes off, 4 Chinese symbols appeared on their chest, then a weird black ink spewed out of their body, and a strange force burst out instantly. The level of this technique was higher than the 8 Violet Flames formation. That force penetrated the purple walls, leaving no dead space in the entire hall. Such a situation would have been bad even for a Super Kage level powerhouse. If this attack were performed flawlessly the same way as this one, he would undoubtedly die. Unfortunately, this is still not enough to defeat Naito. Naito has completely passed that level, and entered the 6th path level. He's way much stronger. He's just a half step before reaching the 6th path level, thus even if he faced one, Naito wouldn't be completely helpless, he could still put a fight. Although the reverse 4 symbol ceiling is strong, it is not enough to defeat the 6th path. Looking at the black ink rushing out of their body, Naito opened both of his hands, then gently wielded. Crack! With the wave of Naito's hands, white light burst out of his body, wrapping his body inside, then instantly spread in all directions. The black force spread too, covering everything, but in that darkness, a white light spread out, forming a white and black swirl. As for the 8 violet flames, it has already shattered under the fierce confrontation of the black and white forces, and the 16 roots shine abyss got immediately smashed by the vortex. After a few moments, the vortex gradually dispersed. Naito stood in the center of the vortex, unharmed. He didn't even have a scratch on his clothes. His white cloak shuddered slightly, then he quietly came outside of the hall. Looking at this scene, made Danza terrified. How could he be this strong? Even the reverse 4 symbol ceiling. As I said, you don't understand how big is the gap between us. Naito looked at Danza faintly, noticing that only 2 Sharingan were left open on Danza's arm, so he flickered his finger one more time. Boom! A wave of the shock force spread away, covering Danza's body instantly. Danza got crushed again. This time when he got resurrected, Danza finally showed a hint of fear. He was afraid of Naito's power. At this moment, he suddenly couldn't help but feel a little bit ridiculous about his attempt to touch this force, relying on the reverse 4 symbol ceiling and 8 violet flames formation. Those techniques, in front of Naito, turned out to be so vulnerable. Naito's power has made him feel like an ant. At that moment, Danza has finally understood what Naito meant by that sentence, and he didn't want to do anything related to him anymore, he just wanted to run with his life. Without any hesitation, Danza turned his back and ran. No, I can't die here. Definitely not now. You want to escape, don't you feel it's too late? Naito didn't move an inch, he just pointed his finger one last time at Danza, and the former's body instantly collapsed. This time, the last Sharingan was finally closed, the Mangekyo Sharingan were useless, and he couldn't use them anymore, it was the end. Damn. Damn this, I can't do Izonagi anymore, I don't have any choice but use. As he was taking his last breaths, a crazy thought flashed into Danza's mind. He had Hashirama's cells transplanted on his right arm. If he uses all the chakra remaining in his body, he can use the Mokuton release. However, the range of that attack will undoubtedly cause significant damage to the village above once it's performed under it. However, without wasting time, Danza made his decision, he was gonna sacrifice Konoha. As long as that old man keeps his life, everything is worth sacrificing. Suddenly, Danza injected all of his chakra into his right arm. Whoosh! Suddenly his arm showed a weird distortion, then a thick tree suddenly extended out, rushing toward Naito and getting bigger and bigger. It looked like it's attacking Naito, but in fact, it was attacking everything that comes in its way. It filled the entire base, spreading in all directions, even the ninjas and the civilians above felt this. The previous battle between Naito and Danza didn't cause a lot of damage to the area. Thus, Not many people noticed it, but this attack made the whole village tremble above. What is happening? It seems there's a battle going on underground. The shocked ninjas reacted immediately. Underground, the thick filled every corner in the root space, to the point where Danza could no longer see Naito. However, the scope of this attack was enormous. He didn't worry that Naito can avoid it. This is the power of the true god of Shinobi. Even if people gave you the same nickname, you're not compared to the true god. Looking at trees spreading madly, Danza seemed pale. At that moment, countless thoughts flashed through his heart. Even Konoha suffered a massive blow because of this, yet Naito also got killed. It will be worth it. Even the village itself can be sacrificed as long as it's on the right way to unify the Shinobi world, and this was the case for Danza. Suddenly, a voice emitted and interrupted Danza's fantasy. So this is your last answer? That cold voice made even the mad surging of the trees completely freeze for a moment. Naito, who was standing in front of these trees, suddenly stretched his arms, then gently crossed them against his chest. Suddenly a white halo light emerged on his fists, distorting the space around him, then he slammed them on both sides. Crack! The cracks instantly spread toward the trees, cracking the first one, the second, the third. In a second, those trees that were madly spreading crumbled inch by inch from the edge, then instantly, the cracks spread to the middle. Suddenly, it all shattered. If this release was made by Hashirama himself, Naito might have taken it seriously, but this one was weak to the point that it's a disgrace to call it Mokuton release. Naito didn't feel sorry for Danza, in fact, his heart was filled with endless coldness. Although he hated him, he respected one thing that Danza had before, that will to do anything for Konoha. But now it seems that all of that was simply mere words. All of that talk about Konoha unifying the Shinobi world was to cover his true disgusting will to seek power no matter what is on the stake. Sure enough, it was the same as the original. He watched pain destroying Konoha, people die, and didn't do anything because he wanted to become the next Hokage. Seeing how his last attack got shattered before his eyes, Danza felt desperate. Even the Mokuton is vulnerable in front of Naito. How could he be this strong? Why is he so strong? With that, Danza took his last breath. Naito didn't even need to finish him. He used all of his chakra to use the Mokuton release, and died. Even at that last moment, Danza felt nothing but regret. At that time, when Naito was still a weak kid, he should have forced Sarutobi to use him. If that happened, perhaps the world would have been now in his hands. Naito stared coldly at Danza, who was lying there on the ground. In his opinion, Danza is nothing but trash. Sarutobi is a way better person than him. This trash should have been dead a long time ago. Suddenly, Naito's heard rushed footsteps coming from the distance. In a few seconds, a few Anbu rushed into the root space, followed by other Konoha Shinobis, and finally, a large group of Shinobis surrounded the place. At that time, the base was empty, everything got destroyed, even those pillars that were initially supporting the village above disappeared. And the village seemed that it might collapse at any time. Only Naito was standing there, with Danza's body on the ground. What's going on? Isn't that Danza? Danza-sama. The ninjas were shocked, and when they noticed that Danza was already dead, they got terrified. All of them were looking at Naito with some doubts. Since Naito was the only one standing here, there's no doubt that he's the one who killed Danza. Still, they didn't want to believe it. Of course, although they had some suspicions, they still looked at Naito with awe. Naito's aura was all over the place, which made them so quiet, they couldn't even ask, and some of them couldn't even breathe from the oppression sense that was coming out of Naito's body. They could only look at him. Many people already had the answer, but they didn't dare to think about it, because the price of answering that question might be the end of Konoha. Naito Dono, this is. Finally, some of them could break the ice and speak. It was Anko, who has just come here, and the only one who could ask Naito. Naito turned around, ignoring everyone's gazes, and after he saw Anko, he whispered softly. An assassin has sneaked into Konoha. They wanted to destroy the village, and Danza led the Root Shinobi's and fought with them to death, and they got all buried. It was too dark and crucial for a little girl like Anko to understand this. Naito decided to keep her away from this dark side of Konoha. Whether it was a lie or the truth, Anko didn't want to question his credibility. If he said so, then it's the truth. After that, Naito turned and looked in a specific direction, then said lightly, "Isn't this the case, Hokage-sama?" The crowd turned around to look at Sarutobi, who was standing there bitterly, but also with a decisive expression. After he took a deep breath, he nodded at Naito. Yes, that's the case. Of course, he wouldn't dare to not agree with Naito. Not only the crowd but even Sarutobi's heart was full of fear. He was afraid that Naito will drop out his anger on the entire village, then they will be in big trouble. At the same time, he also hated the fact that Danza got killed. It's the Uchiha's destruction event all over again. He didn't know a thing until it was already over. Judging by the field, Naito didn't force his way into this hall. If that was the case, then he could easily guess that Danza was the one who asked him to come. But this doesn't change anything. Danza was dead. The Shinobis who came here first didn't take what Naito said, but when they heard the Hokage's confirmation, they started to believe it. Although they doubted the existence of such powerful assassins, they could tell that the Roots Shinobis has used the reverse 4 symbol sealing, which confirms how powerful the enemy was. Of course, elites who were there didn't take this nonsense. They faintly guessed the truth of this event, but they didn't dare to say anything. It turned out to be this way. Then Naito-sama, who arrived in time, has resolved everything. Anko seemed like she figured out everything, then looked at Naito with admiration. Next to her, there was another girl who looked at Naito with admiration. She was in the original, the teacher of Hinata's team, Kyoinai Yuhai. He could even see Asuma in the back of the crowd. Kyoinai, Asuma, Kakashi, and Guy were 4 of the 12 teachers in the original story. They were all at the same age, but Anko is slightly younger, about 10 years old. Currently, the strongest and the highest ranked between them is Kakashi, who is already a Jonin, then Guy. He has just opened the 5th gate and managed to overcome all of the side effects. He's a step away from reaching the 6th. Kyoinai, Asuma, and Anko are now among the Chunin elites. Speaking of fact, Anko's strength shouldn't be judged inferior to Kakashi's, but since she was Orochimaru's assistant, she didn't participate in any tasks. Not many people know how strong she is. When Naito was about to leave, Anko gathered all of her strength and said, Naito-sama, I want to invite you to eat meatballs, is that okay? Pua. Kyoinai next to her opened her eyes wide. She didn't believe what Anko has said. This obviously wasn't the right time for treats. On the contrary, Naito found this funny. Initially, he was going to leave Konoha directly, but he changed his mind and smiled at her, saying, okay. Upon seeing that, Kyoinai felt a little bit uncomfortable. First of all, the environmental issue. This was the battlefield where Danza and his Root Shinobi has just suffered a brutal slaughter. It's weird to think of eating in such a place, it's somehow heartless. But Anko ended up treating Naito to meatballs. Anko didn't feel the slightest embarrassment. Compared to her, Kuinai felt like dying. However, she tried to stand firmly in front of the god of shinobi. After all, the god of the word is an existence above the 5 Kages themselves. What both didn't expect was Naito's acceptance of this treat. It was simply incredible to the point of shock, which made both of them stand there stupidly without responding for a long time. Rain Village. In the distant sky, a figure was crossing the sky, leaving a white arc behind like a meteor, and whenever it appeared, it was cleared the clouds away. Suddenly, this figure fell directly on the tallest building in the middle of the Rain Village, then walked in all the way to a room, then opened the door. Naito. Kushina was alone, bored to death, but when she saw Naito opening the door, she got surprised first, then she happily smiled at him. She hasn't seen Naito for a month. Thus, she couldn't hide her happiness. Look what I brought from Konoha. It shouldn't be cold yet. Naito smiled at her, then handed her a bag of meatballs. Isn't this the famous meatballs from Konoha? Although it's been years, Kushina could recognize it at a glance. Naito nodded, then said, and it tastes pretty good too. Looking at the meatballs inside the bag, Kushina couldn't help but feel happy. Although she had just eaten something, seeing how Naito brought it with him all the way from Konoha made the anxiety in her heart clear away instantly. Of course, Naito often leaves the village, and Kushina got used to it. Even when he stays in the Rain Village, he often practices for months alone, but this has never affected their relationship because even though they are far apart, the distance between their hearts stays the same. In a quiet and elegant bedroom, Kushina was wearing a white padded garment, sitting cross-legged, with her eyes closed, and practicing her sage mode. Naito was next to her, helping her with her training while observing the situation in his spiritual space. After he returned, Naito once again left some of the pressure on the purple orb in his spiritual space, making the overflowing chakra pouring from it thicker. After that confrontation with the Kotomatsu Kami, Naito's control over the soul becomes stronger, and the spiritual space has become more stable. Thus, the speed of the absorbing and tempering has increased by almost double. When he thought about it, Naito felt like he should thank Danza for that. However, because the speed got faster, the amount of chakra inside the Hoshi was no longer enough to support Naito's cultivation for too long. After all, as the cultivation continues, the rate gonna increase again. Although it is calculated, and the Hoshi can be enough for him for at least 6 months to 1 year, Naito felt like he should already go to Roran. Roran is a small country in the desert, but there's an ancient source of chakra that flows deep under Ran, which is the source of the Ryumyaku. That chakra can even interfere with time and space. Compared with the Hoshi, this chakra is much stronger. While Naito was thinking about Roran, a knock came from the door. Naito and Kushina opened their eyes at the same time. Kushina smiled at him, then he stood up and went to the door to open it. It was Kanon. She had some documents in her hand. When the door was opened and saw Naito in his bedclothes, she suddenly widened her eyes. Kanon blushed, revealing a lovely expression, then whispered, "Naito-sensei, sorry. Am I bothering you?" Naito shrugged and smiled, "Of course no, are these the information about Roran?" "Yes." Kanon nodded. Naito asked her to collect some information about Roran, including its specific location. Naito took the documents from her but didn't rush to look at them. He just put it aside, while Kushina put some clothes on and came over. "You're sure busy lately?" Kushina smiled at Kanan, then pulled her into the room. Kanan looked stressed, but she followed her in. Naito, the Kage of the Rain Village, is becoming lazier every day, and all of the village affairs are falling on you. You poor soul, I would like to help, but I'm not used to dealing with those things. Upon saying that, Kushina couldn't help but stare at Naito. After he became the leader of the Rain Village, after 1 month, he gave up on all the paperworks and the village affairs and did nothing. Everything was being handled by Kanan and Yoriko. Looking at Kushina's expression, Naito helplessly shrugged his shoulders. He was too lazy to manage all of these affairs on his own. Besides, isn't this why he brought Tsunade back with him? It's okay. Besides, we have HolyOniiSama with us to help. Actually, many things are handled by her. Kanan said, trying to defend Naito. When the village got attacked previously, Tsunade was out gambling in a small town. Later, she blamed herself for this, so she took the initiative to handle all of the affairs of Rain Village. Although Naito was still the leader of this village, the person who was handling everything has become Tsunade. As the 5th Hokage of Konoha in the original, she was more than enough to lead the Rain Village. It made it look so simple while she dealing with everything on her own. Upon seeing the two girls chatting with each other, Naito smiled slightly. He didn't want to bother them, so he took the documents and turned to leave the room. At that moment, Kanan seemed like she remembered something important, and hurriedly said, "Oh yes, Sensei, HolyOniiSama is looking for you." Having said that, Kanan tried to stand up and go with Naito as his assistant. However, she got pulled back by Kushina, who looked at her with a chuckle and said, "Well, she not looking for you, let Naito handle it. I was lonely, stay with me, I want to talk to you." Kanan couldn't refuse Kushina's request, so she could only stay. After all, in this village, Kushina was an outsider, and from the moment she put her step in the village, her status was the highest among the people. She couldn't interact with anyone. The only people with who she had a good relationship were Kanan and Tsunade. As for the other people in the Rain Village, they only paid her respect. Naito didn't bother the girls, and left the room, then walked into his office, to find Tsunade there sitting on the chair behind the desk, looking down at the documents. Next to her, a young girl, she was about the same age as Kakashi, standing obediently. She's the quiet girl who followed Tsunade everywhere in the original. Originally, Shitsune has become Tsunade's assistants during the period of Ninja War 3, just like Anko, who had become Orochimaru's assistant. When Tsunade came to the Rain, she didn't bring Shitsune with her. When Sakumo died, she went to Konoha, brought Shitsune back with her. Naito-sama. When she saw Naito coming in, she respectfully bowed down to him. The respect she had to Naito was more like worshipping a god, although she hasn't been in the Rain Village for a long time, and only saw Naito a few times. Of course, for a man, like the god of Shinobi, she only had admiration in her heart. However, Tsunade, on the side, didn't notice Naito coming in, and continued her work on the documents as if he had completely ignored Naito. Seeing how Tsunade was burying her head in the files, Naito sat down aside her, then snored, "Tsunade-sama is so busy to pay us her attention these days." Tsunade got almost stunned by Naito's rude remark. The reason she was so busy was that Naito, in the first place, wasn't doing his job. "Shithead, be certain that I'm gonna scold you after I finish these documents." She glanced at Naito angrily, then she continued her work on the documents. To others, Naito was the god of Shinobi, the man who has the world in his hand, and the man who is admired by all of the shinobis in the world. But in Zwandi's eyes, he was still her younger brother. Similarly, Kushina didn't change her attitude toward Naito. Even if he became a god, Naito was still Naito in her eyes. Naito doesn't hate the awe and admiration, but if all the people around him are like that, it will be weird. Fortunately, Tsunade and Kushina didn't change. As for Kanon, she admired him that much from the very start, so you can say she didn't change too. Ha ha ha. He truly got scolded just now, but Naito didn't mind it and even laughed. He picked up a cap, then poured a glass of water to him, and waited for Tsunade to change her work. Shitsune on the side wanted to pour a cup of water for Naito, but she found that he has done it by himself, and suddenly showed an embarrassed expression. At the same time, she felt that Naito, the god of shinobi, wasn't that terrifying after all. Tsunade is usually hot-tempered and likes to gamble, but she's still very serious when she's doing her job. Even if Naito was in the same room, she still continued her work until it was finished, then looked up at Naito. I heard that you've killed Danza. Yes. Naito frowned, then nodded, although Konoha has claimed that he got killed by some assassins who wanted to destroy the village, and finally got suppressed by Naito. Tsunade could guess that Naito was behind all of this. Well, he deserves it. Tsunade didn't like Danza at all. That hatred started to rise in her heart, from the very beginning, when she became Sarutabi's disciple. Danza and Sarutabi are very different. Sarutabi cared about talent but still paid more attention to the individual characteristics of every person. Thus, Tsunade, Orochimaru, and Jiraiya have all grown up under him to become powerful and very famous. But Danza didn't care about any of that. He wanted to produce machines with no feelings. Although they show smiles and anger, however, they were all fake. Besides, Danza was often fighting with Sarutabi. For that, Tsunade didn't like him. Later, after she saw the dark side of the village, she hated him even more. He was hiding his ambition behind the ideal speeches of protecting Konoha. Naito drank his water, then said this sentence that specifically described Danza's true nature. Tsunade also nodded. Naito put the cup down, then smiled. Were you looking out for me to determine whether I was the one who killed him or not? Of course not. I need to talk to you about an important matter. Although the lower-ranked and the middle-ranked shinobis in the Rain Village can't be compared with the 5 major villages, but because of Naito's existence as the leader of the village, the Rain is considered now the 6th village, and they are feared by the others. Among the shinobis circles, only the leader of the 5 major villages of the 5 major lands can be called Kages. The other leaders are not recognized by that title, but if he decided to call himself the Amkage, the world of Shinobis would undoubtedly recognize him by that title. The statue of the god of Shinobi is entirely above the Kages of the 5 major villages. If the god of Shinobi wanted to call himself a Kage, who would dare to refute his will? However, Naito didn't bother to claim himself as a Kage. At Naito's office, Tsunade didn't continue to sit on the chair behind the decks, but walked to the front and sat down next to Naito. Shitsune, on the side, was obediently pouring a cup of tea for Tsunade. Naito, you should know that the 5 major villages has started a peace talk. Tsunade didn't touch her cup of tea but said that firmly. Naito nodded slightly, then said, I know, but I didn't give a lot of attention to the details of this matter yet. Okay, here's the ridiculous part. Tsunade paused for a moment, then continued, although they announced the end of the Third World War after the deaths of Sakumo and the Fourth Kage, and it has been a long time since now. The peace talk got delayed several times now. Thanks to you, Konoha had their grasp on a lot of Baijuo, and they hold an absolute advantage in the negotiations. Thus, their demands will be extremely high. However, the other 4 villages are not stupid. They're aware that you're not with them anymore. Thus, they're not forced to accept Konoha's condition and decided to play the long game. Upon saying that, Tsunade paused for a moment. Naito stood there quietly, listening to Tsunade's explanation without any interruptions. He was just drinking his water, and Shitsune, on his side, was filling his cup again every time. Seeing that Naito didn't talk, Tsunade continued, although they were one step away from winning this game, Danza suddenly died, they were unable to cover it, and the news instantly spread all over the world. Hearing this made Naito a little bit surprised, but he couldn't help but laugh deep inside. This man's failure is hunting them down even after his death. It didn't take much effort for Tsunade, who was far away from Konoha, to figure out that Naito was the one who killed Danza. How could the other villages not know with all of their spies? Initially, the 4 villages were about to give up and agree on Konoha's conditions, but Danza's death changed it all. They felt that Naito's relationship with Konoha is getting worse every day, which made them immediately refuse. Thus, the long game continued. Danza's death caused a lot of troubles, and to be honest, it started to be a little bit ridiculous. Yesterday, the 5 major villages decided it will be useless to continue to talk this way, and they decided to start a 5-Kage peace talk. 5-Kage peace talk. Naito once again got surprised. Things are really getting interesting. Yes, the 5 major villages decided to have a peace talk, with the 5 Kages face to face to thoroughly determine the treaty after the end of Third World War. Is that so? However, you still didn't reach the part where you tell me why called me over. After he nodded, Naito looked up at Tsunade. In fact, he already had some speculation in his heart. Sure enough, the next thing she said, I hope that you will also participate in this 5-Kage peace talk as the Reign's leader. He knew that she will say that, still he couldn't help but feel down and say, why? This has nothing to do with me, I don't wanna go. Tsunade suddenly stood up, staring at Naito firmly, and said, of course, it has everything to do with you. You boy, is the leader of this village. Don't expect me to do everything on my own. Moreover, even if we didn't suffer any damage from the war, but we were part of it, and we can use the extra materials and territories, it will be a great help for the development of the village. Naito twitched his mouth a bit. Tsunade is really taking this matter seriously, it became really troublesome for him. He was too lazy to participate in any negotiations. If he really cared about supplies, he would have taken the territories forcibly from the other villages. He could even make the major villages obediently send the materials to the Rain village. When he thinks about it, it's not even difficult for him to unify the Shinobi world if he wanted. Well, if that's the case, then I quit. I announce you, the next leader of the Rain village, HolyOniiSama. You will participate in the peace talks as the leader of this village. If that's all, then I. With that said, Naito stood up and was serious about leaving already. Shitsune, on the side, got stunned. He just gave up on the leadership of the village with one sentence. Is this the true character of the god of Shinobi? No, it seems that Naito-sama doesn't care about the position of Rain's leader. After all, he is the god of Shinobi. Boy, you come back here. Watching Naito's attitude, Tsunade stood up angrily and said, "I will go, but I need 2 guards to accompany me, and you will be one of them." In fact, Tsunade has expected that Naito was gonna pull out something like that. Knowing how lazy he is, she knew he will give up on the position of the Reign's leader in the end. Well, I think that Yoriko and Kanan are more than enough. If you feel that Yoriko is not right for the job, you can also take Kushina. If she doesn't want to go, then you. As if there we have more than these 3. Tsunade clenched her fist, threatening Naito. Naito suddenly froze in his place. If he moved 1 more inch, she was really gonna hit him with that fist. Although Naito has the strongest punch in the Shinobi world. But he still doesn't want to know where Tsunade's blow belongs in that list. It's really not cute to threaten people with fists all day. Even Kushina doesn't scare him this much when she gets all red hot-blooded habanero. Tsunade sighed deeply. Of course, she can also be cute sometimes. But if she didn't have this firm side of her, it would have been really difficult for her to leave the village and handle its affairs. Since you're insisting, then I will go. But still, I'm leaving the Reign's leadership position to you. Fine by me. Tsunade nodded. The reason she wanted Naito to go is because of his statue in the Shinobi world. In front of Naito, even the 5 Kages can't underestimate the Reign village. As for who's really vacates the position of the Reign's leader, it didn't matter much. From Tsunade's perspective, the 4 major villages Jinchuriki were captured by Naito. Although they are currently being held at Konoha's side and used as a negotiation condition for their favor, the Reign village should have a big part of those benefits. Naito only needs to go once and make it clear that he's standing on the Reign's side, not Konoha's. It can even be said that he doesn't need to be part of any negotiation. His status alone is enough for the other 5 major villages for not daring to not ignore his claims. Land of Iron. This 5 Kages peace talk is naturally impossible to be held in one of the 5 major lands. If it got locked in Konoha, it would be natural to think that Sarutobi has the upper hand. The other 4 Kages would be under higher pressure, which they don't want to deal with. As for choosing the Iron Land over other big countries, it is because they are not part of this war in the first place, and they don't even have shinobis, only samurais. After a lengthy discussion, they came to the agreement that the 5 Kages can only have 2 guards each to accompany them. Of course, although they restricted it to 2 guards only, there's no doubt that each Kage will choose the best shinobis they had in the village for that job. With 5 Kages and these 15 elite shinobis, they will have the top forces in the shinobi world. There's no need to worry about security issues. To make it simple, with such power and considering the odds, none of the Kages will pull out any dirty tricks. Land of Iron. The snow was falling profusely, turning all of the building white. In the middle of the village, there was a tall tower with several floors standing there. The buildings around it were forming a multi-layered wall surrounding that tower. At this time, inside of the tower, the samurais were patrolling. The 5 Kages didn't show up yet, and the general of the Iron Land's 3 wolves was waiting here for them. At a young age, Myfune fought with Hanzo the salamander but got defeated by the latter's hands. Later Hanzo regretted letting him go in the original. Counting the time, the Kages should be here at any second. Looking at the snow outside, Myfune muttered in his heart. In the next moment, 3 figures finally appeared in the distance. It didn't take him a while before they were already at the gates of the villages, which made all of the samurais show a sense of alertness. They're coming. With Myfune's eyes flickering slightly, he thought about the identity of these 3. Myfune rushed directly to the gates, then suddenly showed a stunned expression. You're the leader and the two guards of the Rain Village. The leader stopped in front of my Fune, then responded firmly. The land of rain is located between the lands of the fire, earth, and wind. It can be said that it's located in the center of the Shinobi world. Behind Tsunade, two people were standing. The first is Kanon. Although she's usually swamped, she never gave up on her training, and she's now at the Kage level strength. The other former Anbu commander of the Rain Village, which is also at the same level as Kanon. Yoriko is relatively weak, so she didn't consider taking him at all. As for Kushina, she wasn't interested in going, and Naito naturally was lazy to convince her to go. And of course, even lazier to come as a god. Rain Village. My Fune seemed stunned for a moment, then he said, "This is the 5 Kages peace talk. The Rain Village didn't get an invitation." Tsunade showed a small smile, and let go of her momentum, which made my Fune and some of his samurais terrified for a moment. "Do I need an invitation?" "Well." My Fune seemed horrified. The Land of Iron is a neutral country, and they never participated in the Shinobi Wars. Moreover, my Fune had a history with the previous leader of the Rain Village, and he has almost died at Hansa's hands. It was hard for him to deal with these surprising guests. My Fune didn't have any choice but to let Tsunade go in. The Land of Iron isn't part of this in the first place, so he decided to let the 5 Kages decide whether they want the rain with them in the peace talk. Although the rain is far less than the 5 major villages, having the god of Shinobis who is respected by all parties on their side will surely clear any confusion. Tsunade looked back at her gods, then she smiled at my Fune and headed to the meeting hall. On the side, Kanon followed her calmly, while the former Anbu commander followed her closely, then stepped into the site. After he sent Tsunade and the others in, my Fune shook his head, then went back to his position, waiting for the arrival of the other Kages. Immediately after Tsunade's arrival, he saw the third Sushikage with his 2 guards behind him walking all the way in the distance. "HolyOniiSama, we should be the first to arrive." Seeing the village in front of them, one of Onaki's guards said. Onaki smiled slightly, then snored, "Who knows?" After a few breaths, the third Sushikage Onaki and his guards came to the gate. Seeing the hat on his head, my Fune, this time, didn't have any kind of confusion and greeted him, nodding, "HolyOniiSama, please from this way." Onaki stopped for a moment and asked, "Are other Kages already here?" "No." "Then it looks like I'm the first." "Well," my Fune said with a strange look on his face. Onaki, who was about to walk in, stopped again and looked at him, wondering what did he mean. "What happened?" "None of the other 4 Kages has arrived, but someone who didn't have an invitation has shown up." "Who is that?" Onaki was a little stunned. He couldn't think of anyone who has the courage to give the most influential people in the world trouble while they are trying to have a peace talk. "Who is this scum? Why did you let them in?" "Well, it's the leader of the Rain Village." "What?" Onaki got annoyed. The moment he heard these words, his face became dark. Even Onaki's 2 guards got stunned when they heard this sentence. Onaki's expression was extremely disgusted, the corner of his mouth was twitching, and felt embarrassed by his previous remark. He has just asked why he did let them go in. Forgetting that there's now another village who's qualified to intervene with the other 5 major villages' business, the Rain Village. The Rain Village has suffered heavy losses during the Second World War, although they made it really difficult for the other 3 major villages who participated in that war to deal with them. Hansa the Salamander, the Rain leader, lost the battle in the end, and if things kept that way, they wouldn't be qualified today to participate in the 5 Kages peace talk. But everyone knows what happened later. Hanzo the salamander got killed by the next leader of the Rain Village, the god of Shinobi, Naruto. Asking Mifune to not let them go in is simply nonsense. Even Onaki wouldn't dare to do such a thing. That guy came to talk. This is really unexpected. Onaki became really anxious. If he was facing another Kage, he would be extremely calm, but facing Naruto, he can't help but feel terrified. Of course, Mifune knew the reason behind Onaki's expression, but the leader of the Rain Village right now doesn't seem to be the god of Shinobi, but a woman. When Onaki walked into the room, he saw Tsunade, who was sitting there. Onaki was preparing to face Naruto, the god of Shinobi, thus, he was taking one deep breath after another, trying to calm himself, but when he came in, he didn't see Naruto, but Tsunade. Onaki naturally knew Tsunade's identity. She was once the leader of Konoha's medical team. He put her on the top of his assassination list in the Third World War. Alas, Tsunade was powerful. But the real question is, why is Tsunade here? Is she filling in the position of Rain's leader in this meeting? Although he didn't know the answer, Onaki didn't ask but started down calmly in his chair. Initially, there was no place for Tsunade, but after this incident, Mifune didn't have any choice but to deal with this matter with great importance and add a chair and with a flag, the Rain's flag, behind it for Tsunade. Soon, the other Kages also arrived one after another. The second to come was the 4th Mitsukage, followed by the 5th Kazekage, who was the same as the original, Gaara's father, Rosa. After the death of the 4th Kazekage by Hatake Sakumo, he became the 5th Kazekage of the Sand. After him, the 4th Raikage of the Cloud, then the 3rd Hokage, Sarutobi, finally arrived. When the other 4 Kages finally arrived, they saw Tsunade too. Although it was mysterious to them how did she become the leader of the Rain Village, none of them asked. Once they heard that Naruto was involved, they couldn't help but accept it. This is the god of Shinobi we're talking about. If she dares to claim that she's the leader of the Rain Village, then sure it's true. When Sarutobi entered the room, he glanced around and saw Tsunade. He couldn't help but feel stunned more than the other 4, then he even exclaimed, "Tsunade! It's been a long time, Sarutobi-sensei." Tsunade sat there looking at Sarutobi, and even though she greeted him, she seemed remarkably calm and indifferent. She didn't show any emotion. She came here as the leader of the Rain Village, and this kind of treatment has defined her intentions very clearly. "Why are you here?" Sarutobi, at that moment, asked the question that the other 4 were too eager to know its answer. "I'm the new leader of the Rain Village. I came to join this peace talk. Is there any problem?" Tsunade asked coldly while looking at Sarutobi. Sarutobi gave a bitter smile. Naruto sure showed how important Tsunade was to him when he asked for her instead for the position of the Hokage, and now he's even giving her the position of Rain's leader. However, considering his status as the god of Shinobi, it really doesn't matter who's the leader of the Rain Village. Even if Naruto asked to be the Hokage now, Sarutobi wouldn't be able to refuse. In other words, they don't dare to stop him because they can't stop him. Onaki, the 3rd Sashikage, was the calmest one because he was the first to see Tsunade since he was the first to arrive. He initially thought that he was gonna sit face to face with the god of Shinobi. He didn't expect that it was just a little girl. Onaki has also shared the same thought as the other Kages. They all know the relationship between Tsunade and Sarutobi. How could she be able to say anything in front of her sensei? The only exception is Sarutobi. After he felt that bitterness inside his heart, he became somehow joyful. Since Tsunade is here, during the negotiations, it might be possible for him to borrow her strength to use the status of Naito again to obtain more favorable conditions for his side. In the past few days, Sarutobi buried Danza but has been secretly cursing the fate and failure of his friend. Even the other two elders were extremely annoyed by the determination of his death. The 5 major villages were about to come to an agreement. They agreed on handing over a large number of materials in exchange for their Baijua. However, as a result of Danza's death, the negotiation fell apart. It might be the stupidest thing he has ever done in his entire life. Well, now that everyone is here, the 5 Kages peace talk officially begins. Mifune didn't attend. This wasn't the gathering of the 5 Kage from the original. The Land of Iron didn't have anything to do with this meeting. They were only promised some treaties for holding this gathering. Just after the announcing of the meeting, he left the room. Hokage, how are you going to return the Baijua and the Jinchurikis? The 5 Kage, Rosa, took the initiative to ask Sarutobi. As for the other Kage, especially Onaki, they sat there calmly, without the slightest anxiety. The Baijua are very difficult to control and use their power, the same as the Kyuubi. Although Konoha has the 4 symbol seal, it's not easy to find the perfect Jinchuriki. If you can't find the right person to control the Baijua's power, it's just a waste to possess such a force. Therefore, compared to the other villages who want their Jinchurikis back, Sarutobi wants to use them to get more favorable conditions. My conditions are still the same ones I've mentioned before. Sarutobi looked at Rosa, the 5th Kage of the Sand calmly. Ha ha, do you think we're fools, Hokage? We're not blind. Everyone knew how did Danza die. Onaki suddenly answered. Sarutobi sat calmly and said, in any case, your Baijua along with your Jinchuriki are in Konoha's hands. We're not obligated to negotiate, you're the ones who want them back, thus. Please wait for a moment. Tsunade, who sat there for quite a while without talking, finally let out these words interrupting Sarutobi, which made the latter's face look stunning. Regarding the Baijua, if you want them back, you will need to pay us some supplies first. This sentence made all of the eyes fall on Tsunade. If they were any other people, this sentence would have left them soaked in cold sweat clothes. But how strong is her momentum, it still didn't shock them, but they sit there calmly. This woman is something else. After hearing Tsunade's strong statement, the other Kages looked more serious. Are you kidding me? We're gonna take back what it's our own, and it has nothing to do with the Rain Village. Rosa stared coldly at Tsunade. Although, Naito is the one behind the rain, to accept such a condition from an unknown woman who has shown up and claimed that she's the leader of the Rain Village is simply nonsense. If it was the god of Shinobi himself, they would have said a few words or even thought about it. Of course, it has everything to do with us. Although the Baijua is currently in the hands of Konoha, it's only temporarily kept there. You want to get them back, you must then come to an agreement with us first. As soon as she said this sentence, everyone looked stunned. In particular, Sarutobi was looking at Tsunade in disbelief. He couldn't help but even doubt that she was the same person he once knew. However, Tsunade answered his doubt with one sentence. I'm the leader of the Rain Village now. Damn it! Sarutobi screamed in his mind. He initially thought that he could get Tsunade's help, and use Naito for his advantage over this negotiation, but he didn't expect that Tsunade would pick up a fight with everyone, and claim that the Baijua belongs to the Rain Village. Moreover, Sarutobi couldn't say anything against her claims, because indeed, everyone single Baijua was caught by Naito. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel sad deep inside his heart, because she surprisingly treated him the same way she was treating the other Kages in this peace talk. How did he mess up the fact that Tsunade was such a great leader? If he had known earlier, he would have assigned her as the fourth Hokage. It wouldn't have ended this way if he did. If Tsunade became the Hokage, then Naito wouldn't have left the village. The more he thought about it, the more he regretted it. Why did it need to go this way? Even if he couldn't give it to Naito at that time, he could give it to Tsunade. Sarutobi regretted it all, and the expression of the third Tsuchikage of the rock, Oniki, changed the moment he heard Tsunade's statement. Because if he had considered that Sarutobi's conditions are a little bit harsh, Tsunade's has crossed the limit. She demanded the same amount of materials along with some lands. Oniki couldn't help but laugh and say sarcastically, "Hey, little girl, did the Hokage teach you also how to bargain? This is the 5 Kages peace talk. You're not supposed to be here in the first place, you should know your place. Everyone here has a higher status than you." Rosa, at that moment, stared again at Tsunade coldly. There was a touch of anger in Tsunade's eyes. It didn't matter who was talking to her, it was a bit too much to directly treat her contemptuously. "Oh. So you want to bargain based on your status?" Just when Tsunade was about to lose it and attack, she suddenly heard a familiar voice emitting from the side of the room. Thus, she smiled, then leaned back on her chair, and didn't answer. The 5 Kage noticed that this wasn't the voice of one of them, nor seemed like it was coming from one of the guards behind them. Who said that? This is the 5 Kages peace talk. Who dared to sneak into this room? Rosa turned his head angrily to suddenly get frozen for a moment. At that time, even the other Kages' faces changed their color, and became shocked and lost all of their calmness. Myfune was there standing, and next to him, Naito with a big smile on his face. The situation after Naito's arrival as always got entirely out of control because Myfune tried to attack him. As a result, the blade of his sword got broken even before he could swing it once at him. After he found out Naito's identity, he didn't dare to stop him from entering this room. Naito stepped in, then looked at Rosa, the 5th Kage of the Sand, coldly saying, "Are you saying that your status is higher than our leader in the Rain Village?" Rosa had drops of cold sweat on his forehead. But he was the new Kage, still young and foolish by his status, thus, he clenched his teeth then said, "Yes, after all, this is the 5 Kages peace talk, even you are not allowed." Boom! Before he could even finish his words, Naito suddenly flashed behind him, then pressed on his shoulder. In an instant, the chair under Rosa's butt shattered, then he got bombarded on the ground, making it crack. Not until that moment, the sand started to rise up, trying to push Naito back and help him stand on his feet. However, with a little push, the shock force shattered that sand, and once again, Rosa got crushed on the ground fiercely, and embedded directly into the ground. If your status is higher, then why are you sitting a little bit lower than us? Naito looked down at Rosa with a cold stare, while the latter looked extremely horrified and unable to speak. It wasn't until the end of Naito's action Rosa's 2 guards reacted, while they looked shocked. "Rosa-sama. Damn." Although the 2 were also extremely afraid of Naito, they couldn't help but rush at him since they were responsible for Rosa's safety. Naito let off Rosa's shoulder, then he turned to the 2 guards who were rushing at him, but this time he didn't even attack but only stared at them coldly. That simple action made their movements suddenly stagnate, they froze in their places as if they got struck by lightning. That stare seemed to contain a terrifying force that can make the whole world fall apart. They stopped moving, they stopped thinking, they even stopped breathing at that moment. It wasn't until he turned around and didn't look at them any longer than they let out a violent gasp. They left them with unstable heartbeats and sweat-soaked clothes. From the moment he put his step into this room, the scene was horrifying. Except for the heavy breathing sound of the two guards, everyone was silent. After struggling for a while, Rosa managed to get out of the pit, but he seemed like he was still terrified as he was looking at Naito. In this room, in addition to the fourth Hokage, who once fought against Naito and knew how terrifying he can be, the other Kages were also horrified watching him, including Sarutobi. No one thought that Naito's speed would turn out to be this fast. They couldn't even catch Naito's after image with their eyes. They were as surprised as the fifth Kage, when Naito suddenly appeared behind him. In other words, if Naito decided to kill them, it will only take an instant, and they wouldn't be able to react at all. Unless they were prepared in advance and joined their forces together to block his attacks. Naito took one more glance at Rosa, then he ignored him, and turned to look at Oniki, the third Hokage, who also had some drops of cold sweat on his forehead. Oniki once fought against Naito, and he could still see that Naito's character didn't change at all. Third Hokage. We've met again. Looking at Oniki, Naito said indifferently. Yes. The third Hokage, Oniki, took a deep breath, then responded in a light tone, but his eyes were very alerted. None of the people who were in this room here are simple characters. Even Rosa as the fifth Kage, was very young, and to be able to fill that role, makes him one of the most influential people in this world. However, in the presence of Naito, he couldn't do anything. A light touch directly pressed him to the ground, unable to fight back. This speed and power are simply incredible. It seems that the rumors are really true. The intelligence about Naito is actually very accurate. This man has the power of a god. He's no different from Senju Hashirama or Uchiha Madara before him. I think you were talking about status. Naito looked at Oniki coldly, standing in the middle of the room. He turned around and said, "Tsunade is my sensei, so I think that every one of you should be polite around her, am I right?" Upon saying that, he looked again at Oniki, then walked step by step toward him. With each step, his momentum was spreading violently, echoing in all directions. This horrible momentum was overwhelming, making the people in his presence reveal their horror. Just when he was halfway, the ground under him could no longer bear holding him above it, and suddenly cracked. With the spreading of his momentum, the samurais outside suddenly looked stunned, and the feeling of pressure that it gave them made their bodies soaked in a cold sweat. With his momentum getting stronger, even the guards of the five Kages could no longer withstand. They felt like dwarfs in the presence of a giant. Damn! Oniki could feel his body getting colder as if his time has come. With every step that Naito was taking toward him, he felt like if a big mountain was pressing on his back. He could no longer bear it. At that moment, Oniki decided to strike. He suddenly clapped both of his hands and shouted, "Dust release, detachment of the primitive world technique." Whom? A white cube got formed, then flew directly toward Naito. Oniki didn't wish to kill Naito. He only wanted to distract him, or stop his movement, so that his momentum can be eased. Otherwise, it's like that he wouldn't be able to bear it if his momentum got any stronger. This wasn't a technique, it was just his spiritual power. However, in the face of Oniki's dust release, Naito didn't have the slightest hesitation and didn't stop, he kept the same rate and stepped forward. In the past, Naito has faced Onuki, it was a life and death battle, he was one of the fierce enemies that Naito once crossed his sword with him. But Naito now is in a different league, even the dust release is just dust in front of him. Facing the cube that was rushing toward him, Naito simply extended his hand, and while staring at Onuki, he grasped it directly. The cube suddenly stopped moving. Crack! The cracks on the space suddenly wrapped the cube from all directions, making it shrink to the size of his hand. Finally, Naito's caught it directly, then gently pressed it. Hum! For an instant, a white light flashed inside Naito's palm, blinding everyone's vision. This dazzling light seemed as if it was caused by the explosion of a star in the sky, but it didn't last for a long time, and gradually faded away. When everyone recovered their vision and saw the scene in the field clearly, Naito was lowering his hand gently. Without stopping, Naito kept walking toward Onuki, as if nothing has happened. Everyone was so quiet. They looked stunned, especially Onuki's guards. The look in the eyes was full of disbelief. He shattered the dust release with his bare hands. As shinobis from the rock village, they knew how strong the dust release is. But the dust release that was stronger than any Kekii Genkai got easily defeated. Even if he's the god of shinobi, he shouldn't have such terrifying power. This is simply incredible. Compared to the horror that these two felt, Onuki was the most terrified. If anyone here knows the power of the dust release the most, it's undoubtedly Onuki himself. Onuki, the third Tsuchikage, and Mua, the second, once fought against Uchiha Madara. Although they barely survived, they got almost crushed by Madara. The power of the dust release has proved its strength, and they managed to break through his Susanoo. Besides, he believed that even if he had faced the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama, with his dust release, it wouldn't have got trounced this way. However, in this way, even the release that is above all other Kekii Genkai cannot defeat the Naito. In fact, he just crushed it with his bare hands. What is this logic? Onuki saw clearly that Naito grabbed his cube and crushed it using the so-called shock force. He already understands the concept of that power from their previous fight in the Second Ninja War. However, at that time, he could barely block the dust release, but now, that same power is vulnerable in front of Naito. Looking at Naito, who continued to walk toward him step by step, Onuki could feel the chilling on his spine. Respect is an essential thing, we need to respect the old and love the young. Naito walked in front of Onuki, while the latter looked stunned and said, "You're the oldest here, and you should sit higher than the others, then. How about sitting in the sky?" As soon as Naito's voice fell, Onuki felt the urge to retreat, but how could he with that kind of speed? He didn't have any choice but to stand there without any resistance. Whoosh! Almost instantly, he got kicked by Naito, then threw out fiercely, like a cannon. Whether using his dust or rock releases wouldn't help him in this kind of situation, nothing will stop Naito's attack. In the end, he couldn't help hardening his back to strengthen his defense. Boom! 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 Onuki's back kept penetrating the entire tower, floor after floor, until he finally reached the sky, leaving only a series of holes in the ceiling above. Looking at this scene, the Raikage showed endless horror. He sat there without saying a word, while the third Hokage, Sarutobi, sat there frightened to death. Gurgle. The only one who didn't see Naito's strength yet, the fourth Mitsukage, couldn't help but swallow, looking at Naito with his heart sinking in fear. So this is the power of the god of shinobi, it's unbeatable, it is simply incredible. I hope we've cleared this misunderstanding about status. Knight turned around and glanced at the Kages. Everyone didn't speak, including Sarutobi. The crowd was silent. Very well, so you can continue your peace talks. Onaki should be able to fly back in here soon. But if you want to continue discussing identity and status, then you might as well talk to me first. Having said that, Naito turned directly to Tsunade, nodded to her, then smiled at Conan, who stood behind her and left the field directly. Even after he walked out of the room, there was only the sound of breathing in the place. Everyone was silent. Outside of the gate, Myfune was shocked by the scene of Onaki flying into the sky. It was clear that Naito is the one who attacked him. Thus, when he saw him coming out of the room, he couldn't help but feel terrified. He subconsciously stepped back and didn't dare to him. As for the damage caused by him to the building, he didn't even have the idea of talking to him about it. After walking out of the tower, Naito glanced at the sky and saw Onaki there floating, but he didn't dare to come down. He shook his head, then he suddenly kicked the ground and flashed to space. Seeing Naito suddenly flying from the ground to the sky, Onaki felt terrified, and hurriedly wanted to escape, but facing Naito's speed, he didn't have any chance at all. Sorry, it seems like your voice can't reach those who sit on the ground, and honestly, there's no seat for you here in the sky, so sit down now. Suddenly, Naito appeared in front of Onaki and tapped his shoulder. Suddenly, he got bombarded to the lower tower, and even with the use of the lightweight rock technique, he couldn't stop the fall. Seeing that he was about to hit the tower, Onaki looked frightened, and couldn't help but move his body aside, and hit the floors again until he reached the room of the 5 Kages gathering. When he finally reached that room, the shock force gradually weakened, and his lightweight rock technique finally made its effect, holding his body from hitting the ground directly. As a result, Onaki, the 3rd Sashikage, flew back to his chair and sat there under the horror of the other Kages. But his expression obviously didn't seem relaxed, but he looked extremely embarrassed. The horror was evident on his face. After a brief confrontation with Naito, Onaki couldn't believe how much Naito has grown after their battle in the Second Ninja War. This is insane. The silence was still in control of the room, and when Onaki sat back on his chair, Tsunade finally broke the ice and said, "So, can we continue our discussion now?" After leaving the tower, Naito left the Iron Land directly. This land was full of snow, although it's not always snowing. The white color is everywhere. It's the same as the Land of Rain environment. If it was a little bit colder, the Rain Land could have become a country full of snow, just like the Iron. After he left, Naito went straight to his real destination, Rorin. Rorin is located in the desert, but not the one in the Land of Wind. In fact, Rorin is not a country but more like a small village. The whole land is not as big as Konoha, let alone compared it to the Land of Fire. The entire land is actually about the same size as the Rain Village. According to the intelligence he got from Conan, Naito kept advancing in the sky toward his target. The land below him was aerially a desert, and after flying for a while, he finally reached it. This is Rorin. The architecture of this land is extraordinary, similar to the one in the Land of Rain. Although the area is not large, all of the buildings are incredibly high. The only reason for this country to exist in this desert is the energy that was coming from the dragon veins underground. Between the white clouds, Naito saw Rorin below, and with a slight movement, he suddenly disappeared and instantly fell on Rorin's streets. So this is Rorin. But it seems that the plot is not the same as the original. Naito was standing on the street of Rorin, groaning slightly. He used his ultra perceive to sense the entire village. Suddenly, Naito discovered that there's no trace for Mukid, the minister, and no one is looking to create a puppet army. Even the queen is not Sara, but Sara's mother. She is not dead yet. I remember that in the original, Mukid has created a distortion in time and space. He came here from the future, and then became the minister, and killed Sara's mother, making Sara the new queen, and tried to make her one of his puppets. Thinking of this, if Mukid didn't come here, then it's because Naito will inevitably end up absorbing the dragon vein's power. In this case, there won't be dragon veins in the future, so Mukid will definitely not be able to travel to the past, including Naruto. And because he didn't come to this timeline, Minato didn't receive a secret mission, and the country is currently in a stable state. If that's the case, then I will go to talk to Her Royal Highness. Naito is not a killer who wants to destroy the world. Since Roran is stable and living in peace, Naito didn't have any intention to bring destruction to this land. After all, his goal is only the dragon veins. On the street, Naito stood there alone, dressed in his white cloak, while the clothes that the Roran people were wearing are entirely different. After all, his white cloak wasn't suitable for the desert weather. Roran is located in a far desert, isolated from the outside world. Thus, although he was just standing on the street, someone noticed him and called the guards. "That's him, that guy looks very suspicious." A resident carefully reached out and pointed his hand toward Naito. Beside him, there were two guards wearing armors. The two guards looked at each other, then walked toward Naito, ready to interrogate him since he was an outsider. It was really unusual to see an outside in Roran since it was located in the desert, and from the first glance, they could see that he was an outsider. Besides, who wears a white cloak in a desert? The weirder, the more they felt that Naito was suspicious. When the two guards came near Naito, few residents stopped to watch. However, just when they approached him enough to talk, Naito suddenly disappeared. Disappearing in the daylight like this without leaving even a trace left the two guards frightened. The other residents didn't pay much attention to the situation, but when Naito suddenly disappeared, everyone looked stunned. What the hell? Is this a ghost? This is really scary. Neither the residents, nor the guards could see Naito's movements clearly, or even ordinary shinobi movements. After this incident, the two guards hurriedly ran to the building in the center of Roran, to report this matter quickly to the queen. In the palace, the queen was sitting on her throne, listening to some of her ministers, dealing with the country's affairs. There was a small throne beside her where her daughter, Princess Sara, was sitting there, listening to the various government affairs, showing a thoughtful expression. Looking at her daughter's expression, the queen nodded, wondering when she will be ready to inherit her position as the queen of Roran. Ha! At that moment, a figure appeared in front of the ministers out of thin air and approached the queen. It was Naito with his white cloak fluttering. The sudden appearance of Naito surprised everyone in his presence. The queen looked fine, but Sara couldn't help but exclaim. "Is this a ghost? Curses! It's an assassin! Protect Her Highness!" The ministers in the rear looked horrified when they noticed that he wasn't actually a ghost. They shouted. The guards outside heard the movement inside the palace and rushed in. The moment they saw Naito, they showed a hint of surprise. How did this guy come in? Why didn't they see him coming in? Kill him! The guards took a deep breath, then rushed toward Naito with their weapons held high. The weapons in their hands seemed to have some power from the dragon veins. The ministers stepped back, and at the same time, The queen protected her daughter by holding her in her arms, looking at Naito with fear. However, the next moment shocked everyone. Suddenly, those guards who charged with all of their power toward Naito stopped. Time seemed to be frozen at that moment. It was evident that they got forced to stop. They were struggling to move, but nothing they did seemed to work, and all of a sudden, cracks started to appear on their armors and weapons. Crack! The cracks continued to spread, covering the entire weapons and armors, and finally, under the shocked gazes of everyone in presence, the steel armors and weapons got turned into a powder that splattered in the ground. Looking at their empty hands and underwear, the guards couldn't help but rub their eyes. What happened? Naito suddenly waved his hand at the steel powder on the ground, and a gust of wind blew it all around. Only the guards with nothing but their underwear remained there standing on the field, along with the ministers who looked extremely shocked. "I'm not an assassin, I just came here to talk to the queen about something." After he did all of this, Naito looked at the queen, and Princess Sarah, who was scared, and said softly. The queen was the leader of this country, although it was just a small one far away from the center of the world. She was a royalty who could calm herself down quickly in such situations. She stood up, and took a deep breath, then said, "Dear guest, please sit here." The queen could tell that such a power is not something ordinary. Even if she ordered it, the entire country wouldn't be able to stop Naito, so she needed to make sure not to anger him. Otherwise, he will be capable of bringing disaster to the entire country. Moreover, since Naito has this kind of power, and he's not here to bring disaster since he chose to disable the guards not kill them, it proves that he's not an assassin. Seeing how the queen looked slightly interested, Naito smiled and sat down directly in the chair where Sarah was sitting. Seeing how he smiled, dissipated the horror that everyone has felt before. The queen stood firmly and spoke to the ministers and the guards below. "All of you can back down." But the ministers and the guards looked at Naito with horror and hesitated to follow the queen's orders. But thinking of the power that he has just shown them, even if he wanted to harm Her Highness, they wouldn't be able to stop it, so they could only retreat with anxiety. Just when these ministers left the hall, 2 more guards stormed into the palace. They were the 2 guards who encountered Naito on the street. They rushed into the palace with horrified expressions to report this strange event to the queen. However, what they didn't expect was the scene they saw when they first stepped into the hall. Because in the palace, the man with that strange white cloak who disappeared on the street was sitting in Princess Sarah's chair, and the latter was hiding behind the queen looking scared. The stranger. "Your Highness, his." Both of them looked stunned. Sitting there beside the queen, Naito smiled, and said, "They stopped me on the street when I came. It seems that I've caused some troubles." "It's okay." The queen sat there solemnly, smiled slightly at Naito, then turned to the 2 guards, and said, "I'm aware of the situation, you can go back now." But both guards looked at Naito with vigilance and wanted to assure how dangerous this man is to the queen. Before she could even speak, the queen gestured with her hand for the guards to retreat. "Yes, Your Highness." Upon seeing this, the 2 guards could only look at each other helplessly and back aside, but still, they took one more glance at Naito with vigilance before they left. They were ready to rush in, the moment they notice anything off about Naito. Of course, this only proves how loyal they were to the queen, but deep inside, they were scared. After all, the man has disappeared out of thin air. Although they had unique swords with the power of the dragon veins, they weren't sure that they could hit a ghost. Naito didn't care about these 2 guards' gazes and turned to the queen with a smile on his face. The queen seemed calm, listening to Naito's explanation. So, that's the general situation. Yes, but... The Queen looked somehow uncertain, because the establishment, and the development of this whole country, was relying on the strength of the dragon veins. If she gave that power to Naito, this country would end up isolated and helpless in this desert. But she could also feel the power the Naito was possessing. The moment he put his foot at her palace, he took all of her intentions, and at the same time, she felt somehow a little bit weak. The Queen was a bit frightened of Naito's power. Although giving the dragon veins to Naito might lead to the downfall of this country, she couldn't refuse, because she felt impossible to turn him down while he was facing her. When he first came here, he shattered her guards' armors and weapons into powder, which made the Queen understand that this country can do nothing to stop Naito. You bad guy. You want to destroy Mother's country, I won't allow it. When she noticed how helpless her mother looked, Princess Sarah, who was standing behind her mother, shouted timidly. This girl seemed a little bit like Kushina, with her bright red hair, but although she was yelling at Naito, she still hid behind her mother, the Queen. She was Sarah, the daughter of Roran's queen. If it wasn't for the existence of Naito in this world, perhaps Mukid would have already come from the future, and killed her mother, making her his queen puppet. Seeing how scared Sarah was, but with a resolute look, Naito couldn't help but laugh, and say, "Do you think taking the dragon veins will cause the downfall of this country?" Of course. Sarah nodded vigorously at Naito, saying, "The development of this country is based on the dragon veins. Without its power, the people of this country will sooner or later die in the desert." Although Sarah wasn't the queen, she has always been with her mother. She has a very clear understanding of how things are running in Roran. After all, she was the righteous heir of this country. Looking at Sarah's expression, Naito couldn't help but tease her more, saying, "But what if I tell you that me taking the dragon veins from this country will actually help you people?" "I'll say that's impossible." Sarah looked firmly at Sarah. At that moment, she wasn't afraid of Naito, and she said, "Without the dragon veins that prevent the sandstorms outside from burying the country, we will be in big trouble. We will not have enough manpower to stop it ourselves, and we wouldn't be able to get enough water resources. It will be difficult to survive." Sarah looked at Naito with a totally unbelieving expression. In her opinion, it would be impossible for Roran to continue to exist in the desert without the support of the dragon veins. Besides, Roran will certainly get buried entirely by the sandstorms without Ryumyaku's power. Roran's queen has been sitting next to her, watching her daughter having this conversation with Naito. Without interruption, she just sat there quietly. Who thought that her daughter can solve things out with Naito by talking? Naito didn't seem to be a bad person, because if he were, he wouldn't need to talk with that kind of power in possessing. Moreover, hearing how Sarah has clearly pointed out the main problems and the key issues, made the queen feel relieved. It seems that Sarah is ready to be a queen. Naito looked at Sarah interestedly. This little girl looked scared at first, but now she's arguing with him firmly. "What if I could rid of the sandstorms?" "Impossible. Without the Dragon VN's power, it will be impossible to stop the sandstorms, and even if you can block it once, you will eventually leave, and what will happen to us after that?" Sarah looked at Naito angrily. The queen was also looking at him, and the expression on her face made it clear that she was sharing the same way of thinking as Sarah. Seeing this, Naito stood up directly, smiled at them, and said, "Then we will just need to solve this problem all at once and get rid completely of sandstorms. A one-time solution." Sarah snorted, "This is just idiotic. You can't solve this matter permanently, because Roran is located in the desert. The queen also seemed doubtful. Even if he's powerful, how would he be able to change the weather? Upon seeing how both of them looked doubtful, Naito smiled slightly and said, "If you don't believe me, you can come and see for yourselves." With that said, Naito turned around and walked outside of the palace. Seeing this scene, the queen couldn't help but hesitate first. Although she didn't know what Naito was going to do, she made her mind, then followed him. Sarah, on the side, followed her mother too while she looked annoyed. This time she didn't dare to argue. She wanted to be there when Naito fails and see what he will have to say after that. The queen was much mature. She feared that he wouldn't be able to stop it, because he could become angry and take the dragon veins forcefully. In that case, it would mean disaster to Roran. She didn't have any choice but to pray silently in her heart, hoping that Naito would let them go after he discovers that he can't do anything to the sandstorms. The moment he walked out of the palace, the ministers and guards outside turned at him shockingly, while they looked extremely vigilant. Naito ignored them directly and proceeded forward. When the queen and the princess came out, the ministers finally breathed a sigh of relief. "Your Highness." The guards and the ministers saluted the queen and the princess. When they saw how they were following Naito outside of the palace, the ministers hurriedly followed. "Your Highness, why are you?" "This guy said he can solve Roran's issues with the sandstorms, in exchange for the dragon veins." The queen didn't speak. Sarah on the side looked at them and said softly. As soon as this sentence came out of her mouth, everyone looked shocked. "Take away the dragon veins." "Absolutely no. This country's existence is relying on the dragon veins' power. I will certainly cause our downfall." All of them looked angry. "If this guy means harm to this country, even if he's strong, we will fight. Yes, we shouldn't just sit and watch him destroy our country." Upon seeing this skirmish, the queen waved her hand twice to signal everyone to be quiet. She saw how powerful is Naito. She knew that no matter what happens, they cannot start a conflict with him. That would only precipitate their destruction. Moreover, even if Naito ended up taking the dragon veins forcefully from them, she decided not to fight back, but to look for another place, and rebuild their country. "Everyone be quiet. This man doesn't want to destroy our country, he said he want to solve this issue, so let's see what he will do first." The ministers seemed full of doubt. How could they believe that one person can change the weather of a whole land? It's impossible to interrupt with how nature works, that's out of the human's reach. That guy has filled the queen and the princess's head with lies. We can't let this happen. Some ministers started to talk again. "Be quiet." This time the queen ordered them firmly, which made some of them even stop breathing for a moment. The queen took a deep breath, then looked at the ministers and the guards around her, and said, "Don't forget, that if he wanted to harm us or this country, he would have done it already. All of them saw it. We can't fight him." Hearing these words made everyone feel ashamed. In the end, someone gritted his teeth and looked at Naito far ahead, saying, "Since this is the case, let's what he can do." That's right, if he can really solve the weather issue, he can take anything he wants. Although she was the one who asked them to believe in him, the queen herself felt that it was impossible to stop the sandstorm without using the power of the dragon veins. While escorting the queen and the princess out of the town, the ministers summoned a large number of guards to protect them. Almost every single guard in the country was there. After hearing the news, even the civilians tagged in. The crowd became bigger and bigger. When Naito reached the edge of the town, Almost half of the residents in Roran were walking behind him. Looking at the endless desert in front and Roran's buildings at the back, Naito finally stopped and said, "Okay, here I go." Seeing that Naito has stopped, the queen and the princess also halted. The ministers, the guards, and even the civilians in the back did the same. Everyone's eyes were on Naito, with mixed feelings of confusion, doubt, and hope, wondering how exactly Naito is gonna stop sandstorms. Looking at the vast desert in front, Naito pictured in his mind the sand village that he once visited before. The next moment, Naito suddenly stretched his hands out and grabbed the space from both sides. It looked as if he had caught something invisible in his hands. Then he pressed down. Ah! The people in Roran didn't know what Naito was doing. However, when his hands fell down, several white cracks appeared behind his finger, then the earth cracked. Bang! Suddenly, the ground started trembling. It seemed as if the world was falling. Instantly everyone lost their footing and fell on the ground, while the desert up front split apart wildly. That simple move from Naito made the ground split into several pieces. A loud roar emitted, followed by the rising and sinking of some of these pieces of ground. Under countless shocked gazes, the entire village rose up high a few meters than the original. But it wasn't a matter of just a few meters, the whole desert was changing. It seemed as if a big invisible hand was grasping the village and pulling it up until it turned this plain into a mountain, then finally stopped. The ground's movement stopped, and the dust started to settle. The crowd was shocked to the point where they forgot to stand up again. Everyone lied there on the ground stupidly, watching this scene with a stunned expression. Sara looked at Naito's back with an evident shock on her face. She couldn't help but rub her eyes, then she even pinched her hand secretly, trying to determine if she was actually dreaming. Naito just stood up there, and land formed the entire country. This is unhuman, only a god can have such power. However, Naito, who was standing in front of her, shook his head slightly with dissatisfaction watching this scene. He couldn't turn it the way he wanted to be. After all, the earthquake release cannot replace the earth release. It would have been nice if someone like Hashirama was here. He would have changed this desert into a forest directly. Although he said that, in fact, the earthquake release is easier to landforms than the wood release. With his shock force, he can even blast a mountain and turn it into a valley. Naito rarely uses hand signs, because he hardly uses any ninjutsu, but this time he was in need to use the earth release, which he wasn't good at it. Of course, this is just to make up for the earthquake's lack of details. Because Naito has the perfect sage mode, even if he wasn't good at using earth release, it will still not be an ordinary release. After all, it's blessed with natural energy. Naito immediately weaved a hand sign then said, "Sage Art, Doton." Then he quickly pressed his hands toward the ground below. Bang! With mixing both of the earthquake and the earth releases together, the momentum was even more magnificent. And once again, the village got elevated. However, this wasn't the most important thing. On the peripheries of the village, the ground started trembling, as if something was gonna drill from below. What? Finally, when the sand settled again, they saw a big thick rock-like wall surrounding the whole village. At first, it was 1 foot higher, but it didn't stop and got higher and higher. Naito was using his chakra recklessly. Its volume has surpassed the Baijua. Even if he was using it to change this terrain completely, it was nothing to him. Roran felt like a small toy in Naito's hands. Rumble. The ground continued to shake, while the crowd kept watching the wall getting longer and longer. Then another layer which was higher appeared behind it, then a third one. In the end, the entire village got entirely surrounded by these rising walls. Whether it was the princess, the queen, her ministers, the civilians, everyone felt shocked and unable to speak a word. The queen thought that he was gonna build some machine when Naito said that he's gonna solve Rorin's weather issue. She didn't expect that he's gonna pull something like this. After this day, the sandstorms will never reach the village again. It almost looks like the sand village, but it seems that something is missing. Ah, yes, water. Naito touched his chin, then looked around, while muttering. His water release is even worse than the earth. And even enhancing it with natural energy won't solve a thing. Because it will eventually drain out. If he wanted to add water, he needed to find its source. However, finding the source wasn't that hard for Naito. He immediately closed his eyes, then used his Ultra Perceive to sense the whole area. Naito could see everything underground clearly. After bypassing the thick layers of sand, he reached the ground below, but he didn't stop there and continued his way down. In the process, Naito felt a massive amount of chakra. It even made Naito surprised. Although it wasn't unlimited, it felt mighty as if it was a tailed beast's chakra. There's no doubt about it, this is the Ryumyaku chakra. Naito didn't focus on it but continued to explore the ground below, and soon, he finally found the source of water buried deep down. The distance was a bit far, not in Rorin's range, a little bit remote, but it still can't cause Naito any troubles. Naito suddenly lifted his feet, then stepped gently on the ground. Crack! The shock force got entirely converged into a line, which directly cracked the ground under Naito's feet, then penetrated all the way down, and finally reached the water source. Besides, the shock force formed a channel under the ground to let the water flow fiercely from it. Having done all of this, Naito took a few steps back directly. Whoosh! Suddenly, the water burst out of the cracks and flowed in a rock-like path that Naito has left on the rock walk, then fell on the desert outside, forming a river around Rorin. Sara, the queen, and others have almost gone insane at that moment. Naito was already a godlike existence in their eyes. Anything he would do after this wouldn't surprise them. The moment they heard the water burble, they finally woke, and looked at Naito with awe, as if he was their worshipped god. Because deep inside their hearts, they believed that Naito is a god. After he did all of this, Naito finally turned around, then smirked at Sara, and said, "Didn't I tell you?" Sara looked ashamed and felt embarrassed. She feared that Naito, the god, would be angry with her because of how she treated him. She simply feared punishment. Please forgive Sara's ignorance, please forgive her, HolyOniiSama. The queen bowed her head to Naito, while she felt extremely disturbed. She regretted that she let Sara speak, and feared that she has offended Naito. At that moment, the queen didn't believe that Naito has come for the dragon VNs, but instead, he fell from the sky on the shape of this human's image to especially help Rorin. The queen has even felt ashamed and embarrassed that she had a doubt about Naito before. Looking at the queen and the princess's expressions, Naito laughed deep inside, then he smirked, and walked toward Sara, then reached out to her chin and touched it. Looking into his eyes, Sara felt panicked. Naito showed a thoughtful expression, then said, How should I punish you for your bold and offensive objection?" "Ah!" Sara exclaimed, but she didn't dare to push Naito away. She felt so horrified, and she even wanted to cry. Upon seeing that, Naito couldn't help but laugh, then he stopped teasing her. He left Sara puzzled, then he walked, passing her to the queen. "So, in exchange, I'm gonna take the dragon VNs." As soon as he said these words, Naito suddenly disappeared out of thin air. The civilians who saw this couldn't help but admire him. Instead of standing up, they once again bowed down in the direction where Naito left. After a long time, the queen took a deep breath, then stood up, looking at the village that got completely changed. The village got isolated from the sandstorm thanks to the rock walls, and the water was flowing around Roran. Although he might not be a god, and just a powerful human being, she couldn't help but be thankful to him. Helping Roran, and changing the landforms of the village caused Naito a small problem. He discovered that the source of the Ryumyaku got displaced. But this was nothing, he could find it again easily, and the dragon veins didn't have any consciousness, it will not gonna run anywhere. The chakra of the Ryumyaku was huge, not as significant as the Baijua's chakra, but since it was pure chakra, it was easier to control than the Baijua's chakra. After all, the Baijua is alive, and the Ryumyaku is just an object. However, he discovered also that this chakra cannot be moved outside of the source of the Ryumyaku. Maybe this is why the major villages didn't try to take it for themselves. But none of this matters to Naito, because he didn't want to take it but to devour it. Crack! Crack! The ground trembled and cracked, and Naito has already entered the source of the Ryumyaku and felt this huge chakra up close. When the 9 Baijuas get absorbed by the demonic statue, the Juubi will appear, and it will have an endless chakra. The 9 Baijua have different types of chakra, and when they all get fused together, they become the most powerful force in the world. Thus the existence of the Juubi is practically equivalent to the existence of this world, and the life force of the world is naturally infinite. However, the power of the Ryumyaku cannot be considered as chakra, it should be categorized as an endless accumulation of natural energy. Naito has even suspected that if he absorbed it directly into his body that he will directly open the 6th path mode. Of course, he couldn't act based on doubt because, for Naito, soul art is the most important. As long as he enhances his soul, he will be able to open the 7th gate and 8th gate, then the 6th path mode will come naturally. Once the 7th gate is opened, Naito will be genuinely equipped with the power that will make him capable of facing anything. After all, opening the 7th gate will mean reaching the 6th path level. Looking at the energy of Ryumyaku in front of him, Naito didn't hesitate anymore and went straight toward it. After he entered the place, Naito felt a power that can bend time and space, but the energy was currently in a stable state, so there wasn't any kind of distortions. Besides, it's not easy to break time and space. The Ryumyaku energy can only bend time and space at the moment when it breaks out. Otherwise, it shouldn't be called dragon veins, but god veins. The moment Naito stepped inside, the energy of Ryumyaku attacked Naito. However, Naito was in his perfect sage mode, even this energy can't harm him. Or that is what Naito thought, however, it was actually enhancing his perfect sage mode and making it stronger. After he discovered this, Naito didn't devour the energy, but stood still there in the face of this storm of energy, and let it continuously wash his body. After a long time, Naito finally felt that the energy could no longer strengthen him. Although this improvement wasn't enough for him to reach the standards of opening the 7th gate, it really enhanced his shock force by a lot. If he had to go all out to distort space before, Naito now has the power to do it easily. And if he goes all out, he will be so close to Guy in the 8 gates, who can cause an apparent space distortion. The next step is to devour the Ryumyaku's energy. Looking at the dense energy flowing around him, Naito's eyes looked really sharp before he closes them. After he closed his eyes, The rich energy of the Ryumyaku seemed as if it has found a place to leak in instantly and madly rushed inside Naito's body. Naito's spiritual space looked somehow unstable for a moment, then suddenly, a tremendous amount of energy burst into the spiritual space. Ha! At the same time, white glowing light emitted there, then faded when Naito came out from it. Ryumyaku's energy oscillated madly in the spiritual space. It was far way stronger than Hoshi's chakra. It felt like if it was gonna break up the spiritual space. Looking at the Ryumyaku's energy flowing, Naito felt a tremendous pressure on the spiritual space, which made his expression seem extremely dignified as he extended his hand in front of him. Boom! This time, Naito used his shock force to forcibly suppress the continuous violent flowing of the energy. Under the shock force, the energy condensed and turned into a sphere, then it started to extend again, and turned into a cyan beam of light. In the end, under the pressure of the shock force, it turned into a green dragon and flew up and down in front of Naito, then it finally started spinning around the purple orb on the side. However, the power of the two was incomparable. Naito currently can only keep the pressure on the Ryumyaku's energy and never release the slightest. He estimated that he will never be able to start absorbing it unless he fully absorbs the power of the Hoshi. After he fully controlled the energy inside his spiritual space, he withdrew from it and returned to the outside world. As soon as he returned, Naito looked slightly stunned. He thought that he only absorbed a fraction of it at most, but the Ryumyaku's energy wasn't as strong as he imagined. In fact, he had absorbed 4/5 of it, leaving only about 1/5. In this case, he didn't need to leave it for the next time. The amount that he has absorbed was more than enough to help his soul complete its transformation. Moreover, he didn't really have space to absorb any more energy. However, Naito didn't want to waste it, he simply absorbed it directly into his body. Naito felt that there was no room to improve before he came to Rorin. His chakra reached the limit, his physical strength was perfect, he didn't have any choice but to open the 7th gate, and awaken the 6th path mode. The bottle was completely filled with water, and if he wanted to add more, he needed to break that bottle. But just a moment ago, Naito's body got stronger when it came in contact with Ryumyaku's energy. This improvement didn't break the bottle, but it made it bigger. This way, he could fill it with more water. Even if Naito had taken the initiative to absorb the energy before, he wouldn't succeed in doing it, because the bottle was filled, and he cannot pour any more water in it. But now, Naito's body has room for improvement, so this time, he could absorb it directly into his body. It can be said that if anyone else tried to do the same thing, their body would have burst out by this energy. Even the strongest Kage wouldn't be able to absorb 1/5 of Ryumyaku's energy. But it was easy for Naito. 1/5 of the Ryumyaku's energy, no more, no less, just the right amount to enhance Naito's chakra, and at the same, fill every cell in his body with vitality and life force. In this way, Ryumyaku's energy has really come in handy for Naito. First, it helped to power up his physical strength, 4/5 gonna be used to strengthen his soul, and 1/5 was gonna be used to enhance his chakra. Ryumyaku's energy got absorbed entirely into Naito's body. Therefore, Naito's power can be said that it has reached its peak, and he has taken another half step to awaken his 6th path mode. Even Naito didn't know exactly how strong he currently is. Well, this is not important. The most important thing is to transform my soul and open the 7th gate. After he took a deep breath and slowly suppressed these thoughts. After the loss of Ryumyaku's energy, the source of Ryumyaku's cave got somewhat unstable, thus, Naito stood in an empty space, and with both of his hands, he used a hand sign, then gently pressed his hands on the ground. Sage Art. Earth Release. Bang! The rock filled the place instantly, and supported the village above from falling. After finishing, Naito nodded and head straight up. Above the ground, Roran. The queen was standing on Roran's street with some of her guards on her side holding their weapons. It was clear that something was wrong, as some of them looked injured. Princess Sarah hid behind her mother, with bitterness evident on her face while she looked at several strangers in front of her. The guards were looking at them with vigilance and anger. It was clear that they were enemies. They were shinobis from the Sand Village. Although the guards were equipped with weapons strengthened by the Ryumyaku's energy, they couldn't confront real ninjas. These people were a Jonin squad from the Sand Village. I have already told you that these changes have been made by God. Do you guys not afraid to offend the gods? The princess looked at how the streets got damaged by the attack of these shinobis and couldn't help but feel extremely angry. That's it for this video, guy. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also tell me your recommendations in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.